Shalom Aleichem, Mishpachim. I'm going to finish Mikeitz, the seventh reading, the seventh Aliyah in the Parsha of Mikeitz. Let us begin. And this is with Ankelos on the Torah. Let us keep going. All right. All right, starting with verse 30, chapter 43, to chapter 44, verse 17. Torah on top, Ankelos on the bottom. Verse 30. Joseph hurried because his compassion was turned toward his brother, and he wanted to cry. He went into the chamber of the bedroom and cried there. He washed his face and went out. He controlled himself and said, "Set the bread." Verse 30. Ankelos turned. The Targum's turned is more explicit than Scripture's figure of speech warmed up. Bedroom. Our Targumist adds a new dimension to the episode by inserting bedroom. He suggests that in the overcrowded Egyptian palace, Joseph could only find solitude and solace in his private bedroom. Verse 31, Ankelos, set the bread. Ankelos renders the biblical idiom literally, but the Saadia Gaon substitutes its intent. Serve the food. Verse 32, Torah. They placed for him separately and for them separately, and for the Egyptians who dined with him separately. For the Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews. For the Hebrews eat the cattle that the Egyptians fear, that they improperly worship. Verse 33, Torah. They were reclining around the table before him, with the oldest according to his age, and the youngest according to his youth. And they were astonished, one with another. Verse 32, Ankelos, for him separately. It was the Egyptian custom for the high official to dine at a separate table. Hebrews. In Genesis, our Targumist renders Hebrews literally. But in Exodus, when the family grew into a nation, he chose the nation's name known during his lifetime, Judeans. For the Hebrews eat the cattle that the Egyptians fear, that they improperly worship. The Targumist contends that Scriptures, for it is an abomination to the Egyptians, does not refer to and denigrate the Hebrews, but the cattle, incorporating the information in chapter 46, verse 34, and Exodus chapter 8, verse 22. He also uses dachlin, which is fears, when Scripture has worship, and is describing idol worship so as to distinguish it from proper Jewish worship, and as a form of denigration. He uses it 3 times in Genesis. Radak elaborates that the Egyptians worshipped the planet Lam, Aries, and therefore refrained from eating all meat. Rashba, Chazkuni, and Sforno, on the other hand, understand that the pronoun it, more literally, refers to the Egyptian attitude, their xenophobic arrogance. They did not want to mix with inferior non-Egyptians, especially during meals, for they felt that this was disgusting and abomination. Verse 33, Ankelos, they were reclining around the table. Scripture has seated. The Targum depicts the people dining at a round table, as in chapter 27, verse 19, and chapter 37, verse 25, which was the practice when the translation was composed. Astonished. What were they astonished at? Rashbam and Radak answer that the brothers wondered how Joseph could distinguish their ages and sit them chronologically, since they were all born within a 7-year period. Chazkuni, who felt that the Egyptians despised foreigners, maintains that they chose their own seats. And could not understand why Joseph was not seated with the other Egyptians. With another, the Hebrew idiom is el, to, while the Aramaic equivalent is be, with, but the description is the same. Verse 34, Torah. Portions were taken from before him to before them, but Benjamin's portion was 5 portions more than anybody else's portion. They drank and became drunk with him. Verse 34, Ankelos. Before them. The Targumist being end-oriented, transforms the Bibles to them to before them. The former portrays the movement, while the latter depicts the result of the movement. The portions were placed where they were sitting. 5 portions. Although our Targumist generally avoids repeating words, he interprets the literary expression 5 yadot, hands, as 5 portions, yielding 3 repetitions of portions, and giving priority to clarity over avoiding repetition. Sforno imagines that the 10 brothers eating in 5 pairs, and as Joseph hands a portion to each pair, he gives Benjamin a portion, for he wanted to see whether they would be jealous of Benjamin, as they were of him. Became drunk with him. Uncharacteristically, Onkelos retains the ignoble portrayal of the brothers sinking into the stupor of inebriation together, using the same word that described Noach's drunkenness in chapter 9, verse 21. Rashi and Pseudo-Jonathan find justification for the apparently superfluous with him, and based on Genesis Rabbah and the Babylonian Talmud, validate the brothers' seemingly improper behavior. They explain that from the day that Joseph was sold, all the brothers, including Joseph, thought of that incident with sorrow and abstained from joyous wine. Now they imbibed with Joseph, and became drunk because they were unaccustomed to drinking. This interpretation suggests that the brothers had a reason for ceasing their abstention from wine. However, at this point in the narrative, they still thought that Joseph was dead and had no cause for celebration. Accordingly, Sforno states more realistically that they were intoxicated because they were unaccustomed to drinking Joseph's more sophisticated royal vintage. Chazkuni focuses on a halachic issue rather than the inebriation. He is concerned that the reader might question the brothers' behavior because of the later rabbinical prohibition against drinking non-Jewish wines, and reminds us that the decree did not exist in the patriarchal age. Onkelos highlights, chapter 43. It is important to note that Onkelos does not contain midrashic, homiletic, and exegetical interpretations and expressions of the Bible, and that it is rather a literal translation of the biblical text. The Aggadic literature of the Midrashim is generally sermonic material intended to convey values and provide inspiration that may be derived from the Bible. More often than not, however, its ideas are not explicit in the Bible, while the oral tradition, both the halacha and the Aggadah, is authoritative and important. Students of the Bible must differentiate between creative exposition and the literal meaning of the text. Targum Onkelos is invaluable in helping us to make this distinction. Beyond the text. Did Jacob have the moral right to refuse to allow Benjamin to be taken to Egypt, since this decision was endangering his entire family? What kind of surety could Judah be? And what kind of consolation to Jacob is Judah's statement that, if I do not bring him to you and set him before you, then I will be guilty to you forever? In chapter 43, verse 9. How do you feel about Sforno's comment that Jacob did not actually believe his son's story about the disappearance of Joseph, and he was afraid that they might inflict harm upon Benjamin? Was Jacob's advice to bring presents to the man and double the money they found in their sacks very sound? Might not the bribe make his sons more suspect as spies? Is bribery ever ethical? Commentators say that when Joseph's brothers were informed that they were to be brought to his home, they suspected that he was going to enslave them because of the money they found in their bags. Although it was the truth, the explanation they offered concerning the money sounded feeble, but the Bible does not indicate that they were in any way surprised at the response of Joseph's representative. Shouldn't they have wondered at the statement that your God and the God of your fathers gave you treasures? Why is the Bible silent on this matter? While it does record that they were astonished at how Joseph placed them around the table. Beyond the text, continuing. Note the discrimination recorded in chapter 43, verse 32, that the Hebrews could not eat with the Egyptians, and how Onkelos attempts to explain the behavior of the Egyptians in an unusual way. Doesn't it seem as if Joseph was treated as an Egyptian despite the fact that he was lauded by some sages for his willingness to be identified as a Hebrew? Or was Joseph separated because of his royalty? Are any excuses for discrimination justified? The Bible records, and Onkelos does not attempt to evade, as he so often does, the unseemly inebriation of Joseph and his brethren. What element is added to the story by including the drunkenness of Joseph and his brothers? Do the explanations found in the commentary solve the problem? How? Why didn't the Onkelos translator see fit to protect the honor of Jewish ancestry in his translation in this case? The Onkelos emphasizes the need to differentiate between the literal meaning of the text represented by Onkelos and the exegetical material found in the Midrashim, while stressing that both are important. But isn't the literal meaning of the text as much a matter of interpretation as the commentaries and the entire oral tradition that explains the text? Haven't we seen that many Bible scholars disagree with regard to the literal meaning of the text? All right, starting a new chapter, 44. Torah on top. He had commanded the one appointed over his house, saying, "Fill the men's bags with grain, as much as they can carry, and place each man's silver in the mouth of his bag. Put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the bag of the youngest one, with his purchase money." He did according to Joseph's word, that which he spoke. Verse 1, Onkelos, appointed. The Aramaic inserts appointed, clarifying the man's authority, as in verse 4 below, and in chapter 43, verse 16. Grain. This is termed food. See commentary on chapter 41, verse 35, where the Targumist renders bar as grain. As much as they can carry, more than they paid for. Silver, the Hebrew kesef, meaning both money and silver, is a key motif in the story of Joseph and his brothers, reiterated 20 times in chapters 42 through 45. The brothers had sold Joseph into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. Now Joseph harasses and tests them with silver. Verse 2, Onkelos, of the youngest one. Why did Joseph put the silver in Benjamin's bag? Sforno suggests that it was to see to what extent Joseph's brothers were prepared to save him. According to Nachmanides, it was to prevent Benjamin from traveling with his brothers, fearing that they were jealous and would harm him. Purchase. Onkelos rephrases Scripture's noun shivro, his grain. Verse 3, Torah. With the first light of morning, the men were sent off, they and their asses. They had just left the city, not far, when Joseph said to the one appointed over his house, "Rise up, pursue the men. When you overtake them, say to them, 'Why did you repay good with evil?'" Verse 3, Onkelos. With the first light of morning. Both the Hebrew and Aramaic read literally, the morning light, which the Saadia Gaon clarifies as when the morning brightened. This sudden shift in time, without revealing what transpired previously, is a poetic style that recurs frequently, as in Genesis chapter 22, verse 4. The third day, Abraham lifted his eyes. Chazkuni imagines that although most merchants would leave at night, Joseph did not send them off until morning, because he feared that under the cover of darkness they would kill the person he would soon send after them to inspect their bags. Verse 4, Onkelos, left the city. Rashbam and Radak observe that the phrase lacks the word from the city, but make it clear that the phrase has parallels in Exodus chapter 9, verse 29, and Joshua chapter 6, verse 7. Some Onkelos texts have from. One appointed. Chazkuni, citing Genesis Rabbah, identifies the appointed as Joseph's son Menashe. And since Menashe caused the brothers, his uncles, to rend their garments, in verse 13, when the cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack, his descendants, the tribe of Manasseh was rent in two, for half of the tribe opted to remain on the east side of the Jordan and not enter Canaan with the other tribes. Verse 5, Torah, this is the same cup out of which my master drinks, and he, moreover, carefully tests with it. It was a bad thing that you did. He overtook them and spoke these words to them. Verse 5, Onkelos, my master drinks. This magnified their culpability. Because whoever steals the king's cup disparages Egypt, and no bribe or ransom can redeem such a thief. Carefully tests. The Bible does not state that Joseph believed in divination and sorcery, but it has the messenger describe the cup as one from which he carefully divines, because Joseph wanted his brothers to think that he had the ability to divine who was culpable. Since Leviticus chapter 19, verse 26, and Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10 prohibit sorcery and divination, and since our Targumist generally prefers portraying Israelite ancestry in a favorable light, he replaces divines with tests. The Saadia Gaon, who borrowed material from our translator for his Arabic translation, writes, He was testing you through it, to see if you would be tempted to steal it. Ibn Ezra and Nachmanides, who believed in astrology, interpret scripture to imply that Joseph had diviners in his employ, with whom he could consult when necessary. Verse 7. Torah, they said to him, "Why does my Lord speak such words? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the silver that we found in the mouth of our bags we returned to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal vessels of silver and of gold from your master's house?" Verse 7, Onkelos, far be it. Rashi contends that Scripture's chalila derives from the term chulin, profane. The brothers argued that the cup was worthless to them. He states that the Targum's chas means spare or restrain. God would restrain us from doing such a thing. Actually, the translation of chas is the closest rendering in Aramaic that can be used to capture the Hebrew idiom. Vessels of silver and of. Onkelos adds the implied. Vessels of, since no one was charged with stealing silver and gold, but vessels. Rashi informs us that the brothers' reply is one of 10 logical a fortiori arguments from major to minor, found in Scripture, which are listed in Genesis Rabbah. The brothers argue, since we showed our honesty by returning the money that we found in our sacks, which you didn't even know about, the major, when certainly we would never have stolen silver or gold from you, the minor. Be killed. The Aramaic is more explicit than the Hebrew and die, which could imply a curse. Verse 9, Torah, with whichever of your servants it is found, let him be killed, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. Verse 10, he said, it will be now as you say, the one with whom it is found will be my slave, but you will be considered innocent. Verse 11, Torah, they heard, and each man lowered his bag to the ground, and each man opened his bag. Verse 10, Verse 9, be killed. The Aramaic is more explicit than the Hebrew, and die, which could imply a curse. Verse 10, Onkelos, innocent. The Hebrew and Aramaic use the judicial innocent. The brothers were willing to accept collective guilt, with the punishment of death to the thief and slavery for themselves. Verse 9. But the messengers offered leniency. The brothers would be guiltless, and the thief would not be killed, only enslaved. Verse 12, Torah, he searched, beginning with the oldest, and ended with the youngest. And the cup was found in the bag of Benjamin. Verse 12, Onkelos, beginning with the oldest, so that they would not suspect that he knew where the cup was hidden. He knew their ages because he had observed how Joseph sat them at his table in chapter 43, verse 33. The cup. No concern was raised over the money placed in the sack, verse 2, perhaps because they could argue that it was money they brought with them from Canaan. Verse 13, they tore their clothes, then each man loaded his ass, and they returned to the city. Verse 14, Torah, Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house. He was still there. They fell on the ground before him. Verse 13, Onkelos tore their clothes, since the rending of garments is generally considered an expression of grief over the death of a parent or other close relative. Abravanel suggests that the brothers were concerned that Benjamin's fate would cause their father's death. Verse 15, Torah, Joseph said to them, what is this deed that you did? Don't you know that a man like me makes careful tests? Verse 16, Torah, Judah said, what can we say to my Lord? What can we speak? How can we prove our innocence? Guilt has been found in your servants from before the Lord. Behold, we are slaves to my Lord, both we and the one in whose hand the cup was found. Verse 17, he said, far be it from me to do this. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he will be my slave, but you go in peace to your father. Verse 15, Onkelos, what is this deed? Sforno senses that Joseph is criticizing his brothers for an act that is both evil and foolish. A man like me makes careful tests. See commentary on verse 5. Onkelos and the Sadia Gaon turn Joseph's self-description as a sorcerer into a claim that he was a careful administrator. Don't you realize that someone who is responsible for the details of an entire kingdom would be careful not to lose a silver goblet? But Rashi and Rashbam are less concerned about the sorcery and suggest that Joseph is saying that a person in his position would certainly know how to divine. Verse 16, Onkelos. Guilt has been found from before the Lord. The Bible turned this as God has found the guilt of his servants. Our Targumist bypasses Scripture's anthropomorphic portrayal of God suddenly finding out something he knew nothing about by adding from before and turning the phrase from the active case to the passive. He also inserts in, which is found in some Targum texts, or the prepositional prefix daled, which is of, in others, and drops the Bible's et. As noted frequently, our Targumist often drops biblical words and letters if the excluded word or letter helps make the passage clearer. This is contrary to the understanding of the school of Rabbi Akiva, which held that every scriptural letter and certainly every word was intentionally inserted into the Bible to teach a divine lesson. See discussion in the introduction to our Shemot volume. See also volume 32, verse 32, where the Targumist drops et. In this verse, the translator also exchanges the Tetragrammaton for Elohim, as in chapter 1, verse 1, and elsewhere. And the one in whose hand the brothers stated in verse 9 that they recommended death for the one who had the cup, and enslavement for everyone else. Now that Benjamin appeared to be guilty, Judah modified the statement and recommended that all be enslaved, including the one who had the cup. Verse 17, far be it, see commentary. Verse 18, please my Lord, be Adoni. A word, I am not going to bother you with a lengthy speech. Before, Onkelos and the Sadi go and explain the biblical metaphor in ears of, as in chapter 23, verse 10, and chapter 13, equal to Pharaoh. Hold on. All right. Yep, I finish here. Perfect. And that is the last, that's the finishing of the Parsha, Mikeitz. All right, so, hold on. Set that there. Now I'll read from the Daily Wisdom on the Torah portion, the Daily Wisdom of the Lubavitcher Rebbe for the 7th reading of Mikeitz. The 7th reading, what I just read, chapter 43, verse 30, through chapter 44, verse 17. Joseph sent his brothers off back to the land of Israel, having secretly hidden his goblet in Benjamin's pack. When Joseph's servant accused the brothers of stealing the goblet, they protested that they would never disgrace themselves in this manner. But the goblet was discovered in Benjamin's pack. When the brothers were returned to Joseph, he informed them that they were all free to return home except for Benjamin. The title of this daily wisdom on the Parshiot is called Inner Identity. Joseph's brothers said, "It would be a disgrace for us, your servants, to do such a thing." Spiritually sensitive people regard their misdeeds as indications of what aspects of their spiritual life they need to work on. Aware that everything happens by divine providence, they even regard being falsely accused of doing some misdeed as a divine sign that there is some flaw in their spiritual life. Thus, the fact that Joseph's brothers were found with something that did not belong to them, even if it was deliberately planted, was meant to inform them that they were spiritually lacking in some way. We see from this that the true inner purpose of everything that happens to us is to refocus us properly. By developing our spiritual sensitivity this way, we can hasten the advent of our own redemption, along with the redemption of the whole world. And that is the Torah reading, finishing of Mikeitz, and a reading of the Daily Wisdom by the Lubavitcher Rebbe on the Parsha. Have a wonderful night, Leila Tov and Shavua Tov.